Hello and welcome to this video on behaviour modification. I'm going to introduce 4 concepts in behaviour modification, followed by an example to elaborate on these further. The 4 concepts are Threeterm contingency, antecedent control, response cost, and differential reinforcement. And the example I'm going to use to elaborate on these is a behavioural excess exhibited by my children, which is watching too much television. We'll begin with the Threeterm contingency. Threeterm contingency is a way of looking at a behaviour with a view to understanding what is influencing the likelihood of engaging in that behaviour. The first part of the Threeterm contingency is antecedents. These are things within the environment that over time become associated with engaging in a particular behaviour and so serve as cues for engaging in the particular behaviour. The second part of the Threeterm contingency is the behaviour itself, and the last part are reinforcers. Reinforcers are what give a behaviour value. A behaviour that is highly reinforcing is more likely to be engaged in than a behaviour that is less reinforcing. From the Threeterm contingency, the next 3 concepts that I'm going to talk about are drawn. The second of these 4 concepts is antecedent control. This is a behavioural modification technique we can use where we look at the antecedents to a behaviour and manipulate those antecedents with a view to changing the likelihood of engaging in a particular behaviour. A behaviour with a lot of cues in the environment is going to be more likely to be engaged in. So if we'd like to see less of a particular behaviour, we want to minimise the cues within the environment for engaging in that behaviour. And vice versa, a behaviour that we'd like to see more of, we would like to put more cues within the environment to increase the likelihood of engaging in that behaviour. The third concept is response cost. This relates to the second part of the Threeterm contingency, the behaviour itself. Response cost is something that we can manipulate to influence the likelihood of engaging in a behaviour. A behaviour with a high response cost is something that takes a lot of effort to get going on that behaviour. A behaviour with a high response cost is always going to be less likely to be engaged in than a behaviour with a low response cost. If we analyse the response cost of behaviours, we can manipulate the response cost and then manipulate the likelihood of engaging in particular behaviours. And the final concept is differential reinforcement. If you have a problem behaviour and you can identify an appropriate alternative behaviour, you can apply differential reinforcement to manipulate the reinforcing value of the problem behaviour and the alternative behaviour with the goal of decreasing the reinforcing value of the problem behaviour and increasing the reinforcing value of the alternative behaviour. So on to our example, which should elaborate on these further. The behavioural excess of watching too much television. So if we would like to use these concepts that I've outlined, we can break it up into 4 steps. Step 1 is to identify and define the problem behaviour and the alternative behaviour. So for the purposes of this example, the problem behaviour is defined as watching more than 3 hours of television in one day, and the alternative behaviour is doing anything other than watching television or watching any kind of screens for at least 9 hours in one day. The number 9 is purely just roughly the number of hours my children are awake minus the criterion I set for the problem behaviour of 3 hours of watching television. So now we have a problem behaviour defined and a specific target set for that, and an alternative behaviour defined and a specific target set for that. So step 2 is to identify and manipulate the antecedents to both of these behaviours. First of all, we identify the antecedents. The most obvious antecedent for watching television is seeing the television, and the most obvious antecedent to playing with toys or doing anything other than watching the television are seeing these other alternative activities available and ready to go. Another antecedent I've noticed with the children with watching television is when they get home from daycare, they have associated that with watching the television. So now that we've identified some antecedents to the problem behaviour and the alternative behaviour, A very simple way to manipulate this, in my case, is instead of entering the house after coming home from daycare through the front of the house, which is next to the lounge room, which contains the television, we can actually go through the back of the house and expose the children to all the cues for playing outside. Now, on to step 3, which is to manipulate the response cost for the problem behaviour and the alternative behaviour. A very, very good way to increase the response cost for watching television is to ask children to tidy up some part of the house. It very quickly extinguishes the desire for them to watch the television if they need to do some cleaning up before watching the television. Now, in terms of the alternative behaviour, we want to decrease the response cost. So a very simple way to decrease the response cost of any other activity is to have those activities available, to have them as self-service as possible, and tidy. The areas need to be tidy. So we have a self-service craft table, we have a self-service painting area outside, and then we have the sandpit and outdoor kitchen and swing sets. These don't require the children to ask me before they can engage in these alternative behaviours. Now, the final step is to identify and manipulate the reinforcers. Now, children engage in watching television and find that relaxing. They engage in playing and they actually do also find that relaxing. The main difference that I've been able to determine between the reinforcers of watching television versus any other activity is that watching television is actually not very satisfying. Most other activities the children engage in are actually a lot more satisfying to them. The main difference then being the response cost of watching television versus engaging in other behaviours. So, if we wanted to manipulate the reinforcers of television, an easy way to do that is to introduce a token system. The criteria, or the level set for the children to be of the hours they're allowed to watch is 3 hours. If I'd like to reduce that further, I can reduce the reinforcement value of the television by having a reward sitting on top of the fridge. They each have 3 tokens, and for each hour that they want to watch television, they have to trade in a token. And if they decided to give me back one of the tokens, which means they forego 1 hour of television, they can put that towards the reward that is sitting up on top of the fridge. And after they've received or given me back 3 tokens, then they receive that reward that's on top of the fridge. So this is designed to reduce the reinforcing value of watching the television. And a good way to increase the reinforcing value of any other activities, remember I'd identified satisfaction as being a reinforcer for engaging in any other activity. A good way to make satisfaction more salient to the children and to make it more to exaggerate the satisfaction that they feel from engaging in these other activities is to actually set challenges for them. So if I'd like them to go outside and do some playing, I can set them a challenge of who can run to the back fence first. Other things that we can do in relation to craft, I can set them a challenge of who can draw a tree or pick any kind of object and get them to see if they can draw it. So I hope you've learnt something from this video. We have talked about three-term contingency, antecedent control, response cost, and differential reinforcement, and with a view to helping you learn to identify antecedents and reinforcers and manipulate these and response cost so that you can modify a behaviour. Thanks for listening.